turn it over and start to introduce our presenter today. Such a timely topic. We're so excited to have Linda Graham with us here. She's an experienced psychotherapist and resilience coach locally here in Corte Madera. And she integrates modern neuroscience, mindfulness, relational psychology, into her national and international trainings. And she is the author of the book Resilience, Powerful Practices for Bouncing Back from Disappointment, Difficulty, and even Disaster, as well as the award-winning book Bouncing Back, Rewiring Your Brain for Maximum Resilience and Well-Being. And she also has 10 years worth of weekly resources for recovering resilience that are archived on her website. That's lindagraham-mft.net. And we'll link to all this in a follow-up email. You'll have access to all this as well. But yeah, with that, Linda, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think I accidentally muted you, so feel free to unmute yourself, Linda. And I'm going to stop my share and you should take on over.
So thank you, Adam. Very happy to be with everyone here today. And actually, I've been watching the names of the participants coming in. And there are colleagues on this call that I have had a lot of esteem and respect for many, many years. So appreciate you all being here today. I've been asked to speak to how we as clinicians can help our clients recover and strengthen their resilience, even how we can strengthen our own in these times of the ongoing dangers and the uncertainties of the coronavirus pandemic. In these times of the large-scale reawakening to the devastation of racial injustice and social and economic inequity in our larger world, and the growing awareness of the white privilege and the history and ongoingness of that devastation, expanding our awareness of the discrimination faced daily by women and members of the LGBTQ community, and the continued prejudice against people's religious affinities, the othering of people with disabilities. So Pat Saunders informed me of the major goof we made scheduling this presentation on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, that marks the beginning of the holiest days of the year in the Jewish tradition, unconscious, unaware. And in the second and third sections of this webinar, I'll speak more directly to how even good people with the best of intentions can not know, or know and forget and not track the history and the traditions and the values of other cultures, even of our own culture. And truly more on that directly in a few moments. I do know something about resilience. I've studied and written and taught about recovering and strengthening our resilience for more than a decade. And I'm passionate about helping clients cope more skillfully, more effectively with the challenges and crises of their lives, and try to provide the practices and strategies that will help them help us as well to cope with any level of disruption and adversity, from a series of small annoyances to the troubles and tragedies that break our hearts and sometimes break our spirits, to the utter catastrophes that can change our lives forever. I do deeply believe that that work is the heart of the therapeutic process. And that work, strengthening our resilience, foundational to our mental health and well-being, that underlies whatever theoretical orientation or modality we might use to help our clients respond to those stressors more effectively. And for 25 years, I've been comfortable in my Eurocentric bubble of my paradigms: psychotherapy and trauma therapy, mindfulness and compassion practice, neuroscience, and the science underlying how we can help clients literally rewire their habitual patterns of response to life events in ways that are safe and efficient and effective. The confluence of those three paradigms was enough to keep me learning forever, and was effective enough in helping my clients individually heal and learn and grow, moving from stress and trauma through recovering strengths and developing new perspectives, new patterns of response to the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, to genuine well-being and thriving and flourishing. And now it seems that's no longer enough. What we're coping with day by day, what our clients are coping with day by day, what we're seeing on the news day by day, how the paradigms of making sense of the world we live in and the rules of those paradigms shift under our feet day by day. And that means we need to stretch our understanding of resilience into something new, into different mindsets, evolving new understandings, new vocabularies, new strengths, and new methods. So 20 years ago, I was in a training on attachment conditioning with David Wallen, who wrote the text on attachment in psychotherapy. And David was showing video clips of the various attachment styles. And I was following along going, yeah, I can see why that's a problem, or yeah, that one. And then he showed a clip of someone with an avoidant attachment style. And I noticed that I said to myself, well, what's wrong with that? That was my family. And we're waking up to the conditioning that we've all had about race and class and gender. Well, what's wrong with that? That was my family, or that's my culture, or that's what everybody thinks. And this waking up or reawakening is not easy. The American writer Pearl S. Buck said, you can judge your age by the amount of pain you feel when you come in contact with a new idea. And I'm getting older in this field. I can acknowledge my pain, my discomfort, feeling bombarded by so many new ideas, new questions, new possibilities. Also just the risks inherent in change, in needing to stretch and grow. So I've spent much of my time since the orders for shutdown in mid-March and the death of George Floyd at the end of May, reading books and articles, listening to podcasts, watching webinars, talking with colleagues, to learn from experts far more knowledgeable and visionary than I, to learn what the new dots even are, and how to connect them in ways that will allow me to develop my own resilience mindset, deepen my own moral compass, and help me guide my clients in their coping, in their choices of response, as parents, as providers for their families, as responsible citizens navigating an unsettled and polarized world. This process has been so humbling. And I don't have the answers. I'm trying to find the right questions. And I hope to share some of these questions with you over the next 2 hours. So this gathering is being held online by Zoom, rather than in person in a large room where we could greet and meet and mingle and catch up with our colleagues that are coping with the tsunami of these changes that we're all being asked to cope with, sharing our stories of worry and woe, as well as the good news that we would like to have reflected back to us by the people we care about and we know care about us. And many of us may already be zoomed out by meeting with clients online day after day, week after week. Even Zooming hour after hour creates fatigue in the body and fog in the brain. We need to get up and move around and stretch, get some fresh air, which we have today, to refresh ourselves for the next client and the next and the next. So I'm organizing this presentation to include time for Q&A and discussion among ourselves as we go along. There'll be 4 sections, approximately 20 minutes each for each 2-hour webinar, for a 2-hour webinar total, where I'll present some concepts, some research, some practices and strategies, some questions, and then hopefully about 10 minutes for Q&A and discussion, then another section of presentation, followed by another Q&A, etc. Please do type your questions into the chat box for Adam to read, or think of your questions if you want to raise your electronic hand, if you want Adam to bring you live into the session. And you will receive a bibliography of references from Adam by email after the webinar. It is not at all definitive or comprehensive. It's just the deep end of the pool that I've been diving in for these last many months. So that hopefully we come away from this gathering with an expanded vision of our work with clients. And with it, if not a lot of answers, better questions about how to move forward. So the first section focuses on resilience, how definitions in the behavioral sciences have evolved in the last 40 years, and how the emerging understandings of the process of recovering resilience can help us help our clients more effectively now. even as the external stressors and our awareness of the impact of those stressors evolves. Second, the unique impacts of the coronavirus pandemic on resilience, our clients and our own, and the importance of cultivating, a resilience mindset to deal with the threats to health and well-being that are not going away anytime soon. And third, the large-scale reawakening of awareness of the reality of the long-standing racial injustice, social and economic inequity, the inevitability and intersectionality of so much othering and oppression in our society, and strengthening the moral compass for our clients and for ourselves that would support engaging with those larger issues with integrity, empowerment, and hope. And then fourth, strengthening the capacities of responsibility to engage with any of these threats of well-being, any of these threats to well-being for ourselves, our clients, to everyone we share our common humanity with wisdom and clarity and courage and integrity, stretching into resilience beyond the individual self, to resilience of the very fabric of our society. So the first section on resilience. 40 years ago, Salvador Mati, who was a psychologist at the University of Chicago, researched the long-term impacts of stress on employees at the Illinois Bell Telephone Company. It turns out, at a time when, due to changes in government regulations, the company laid off half of its workforce. So that was quite a laboratory to study stress resilience. And though not distinguishing categories of race or gender or class, as researchers pay more attention to now, Mati came to name the collection of attitudes and coping strategies that work the best as stress hardiness. It's a good place to start. 30 years ago, researchers in post-traumatic growth, pioneered by Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, interviewed hundreds of survivors of all kinds of stress and trauma. Survivors of plane crashes, being detained in a prisoner of war camp or a refugee camp, losing a child in a car accident, victims of physical or sexual abuse, victims of a natural disaster like a flood or a hurricane. So there would have been much more diversity in the demographics there. And they focused on identifying the qualities that would allow people to fully recover from severe trauma. And the average number of trauma that the research subjects had experienced was 8. So what does allow any person or even a group of people to transform any adversity into learning and growth, post-traumatic growth, focusing not just on bouncing back from tragedy and trauma, but bouncing forward, transforming bad breaks into breakthroughs, as my friend and colleague Michaela Haas wrote in her 2016 book on resilience. Last week, I read in a paper presenting research in 2014 by Rachel Yehuda, director of the Traumatic Stress Studies Division at Mount Sinai School of Medicine, that people can experience symptoms of PTSD and be very resilient in other aspects of their lives at the same time. So post-traumatic growth researchers are looking for ways to emphasize that trauma survivors can recover from trauma and be resilient simultaneously. We'll explore this bouncing forward a bit more in segment 2 of the webinar, dealing with the pandemic. What Kelly McGonigal, who's a health psychologist at Stanford University, calls the courage to grow from stress. 20 years ago, Martin Seligman shifted the focus of the American Psychological Association from the traditional focus on mental illness and psychopathology to mental health and positive psychology, focusing on strengths, virtues, competencies, hallmarks not only of happiness, but also of resilience. And 6 years ago, the APA developed this official definition of resilience. Resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. What is most helpful about that definition is that it focuses on the shift, I'm starting over. What's most helpful about that definition is that it shifts the focus on resilience from traits to the process of adapting well. from nouns to verbs, which is more accurate and more helpful to us as clinicians. Another framework helpful in framing our exploration of our clients' resilience, identified by Csikszentmihalyi in Flow, the psychology of optimal experience, is 3 factors: the severity of the external stressors, the strength of external resources, and the strength of internal resources. So as therapists and trauma therapists, we know that different people respond to different stressors differently, and that the same person can respond to different stressors differently depending on their external and internal resources of the moment that may change over time. And in general, it's very different dealing with a fender bender than being involved in a car accident where we're injured than causing the death of a child in a car accident. And increasingly, researchers are documenting, and clinicians are paying attention to, the multi-generational transmission of trauma, the powerful influence of social, racial, and economic context, and the conditioning of early life experiences. So the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, conducted by the Center for Disease Control and Kaiser Permanente in the late 1990s here in California, did demonstrate the impact of 10 different environmental stressors: emotional or physical neglect, emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, violence against the mother, substance abuse in the household, living with family members who are mentally ill, suicidal, or who had been in prison, on an individual's resilience and capacities to deal with trauma as they grew older. The demographic factors of race and gender were carefully tracked. 75% of the participants were white, 16% were Hispanic, now Latinx, and 8% were Black, now African American. The number and severity of stressors did factor in the outcome, that women and racial or ethnic minorities were at a greater risk for experiencing 4 or more ACEs. And the more ACEs and the longer they were repeated, that led to more disrupted neurodevelopment, social, emotional, cognitive impairment, more disease, disability, and social problems, and early death. And while the severity of the external stressor is a factor at any time, the strength of the external resources is a factor, especially in these times. Does your client have their health or health insurance or not? Do they have savings in the bank, or are they unemployed and living on their savings now? Are they at risk of losing their job or their home? Do they have a supportive family and community for refuge and resourcing, or were they already isolated even before this pandemic started? Do they have a religious faith or spiritual practice that will help them sustain faith and hope? Researchers are beginning to identify that individual resilience is embedded in the resilience of the larger community, the larger culture itself. Our work here around external resources may lean a little bit more into case management, and I'll address that a little bit more in section 2 on the pandemic. We do pay attention to those external stressors and resources and help clients pay attention to them. But most important for us as counselors and psychotherapists, we help clients focus on and claim their inner resources, their inner strengths. Clients may already know some of those strengths. They may be aware of them before we are. They may be discovering them as they shift to homeschooling their children or creating a memorial service on Zoom. But they may experience that some of their strengths have gone missing. They may also be struggling with anxiety or fear or anger, numbing out or withdrawal, pretty common responses of the nervous system to danger and life threat. And we help clients come back to their baseline equilibrium, their range of resilience, so they can respond to the challenges of these challenging times and circumstances skillfully, effectively, and wisely. And we'll focus just on helping clients identify those strengths in just a moment. The final piece of research in the 1990s that is radically revising our views of resilience is the discovery of modern neuroscience, of the proven beyond irrefutability of the neuroplasticity innate in every human being. Every human brain is capable of growth and change, lifelong. The brain learns from experience. Any experience, every experience, positive or negative, causes neurons in the brain to fire, to exchange information through electrical and chemical signals. When you repeat the experience, you repeat the neural firing. And neurons that fire together, wire together. With enough repetition, the brain creates new circuitry, installing new responses and new patterns of response to life events in the brain. So neuroplasticity is what allows us as clinicians to help clients install new, more adaptive strategies of coping in their repertoire of resilience. It's what allows clients to rewire previous patterns of coping that don't work so well, the basis of all trauma therapy. And when we know how to help clients harness that neuroplasticity, we can help them develop more resilience in ways that are safe and efficient and effective. So I love sharing this quote from Richard Davidson, who's the founder of the Center for Investigating Healthy Minds at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. The brain is shaped by experience, and based upon everything we know about the brain and neuroscience, change is not only possible, but it's actually the rule rather than the exception. It's really just a question of which influences we're going to choose for the brain. And because we have a choice about what experiences we want to use to shape our brain, we have a responsibility to choose the experiences that will shape the brain toward the wise and the wholesome. So part of that responsibility of choosing, part of the process, the verb of resilience, is to understand that response flexibility, cultivating the brain's capacities to make choices and respond differently than we have in the past, is a central tenet of resilience. As my colleague Frankie Perez says, how you respond to the issue is the issue. And we help our clients change their perceptions of the stressors they're facing and the perception of the strength of their strength to help them respond more flexibly to any adversity, trauma, tragedy, threat, or significant source of stress. Thanks to the neuroplasticity innate in the human brain, resilience is our client's birthright, and it is learnable and trainable. And part of our work with clients right now is to help them feel empowered to make those choices, to take wise action, to cope resiliently with the current stressors and adversities, no matter how severe or chronic. When I teach clients and clinicians about recovering resilience, I teach practices and tools that develop resilience in the same way that the brain develops resilience, from the bottom up and the inside out. Body-based tools of somatic intelligence, tools of emotional intelligence to manage disruptive emotions and cultivate the positive emotions that shift the functioning of the brain to be more resilient. Relational intelligence within ourselves and with others. Reflective intelligence to see clearly, discern options, and make wise choices. That's the trajectory and the curriculum that I offer in the book Resilience. I look for their capacities to be flexible, to learn and grow. And of course, I listen for what is disrupting or derailing their capacities, but I start with listening for examples of their experiences when they've already been resilient. I look for the strengths and capacities they already have and help make those strengths and capacities of resilience visible to them. I will lead them through an exercise to identify traits of resilience they already have, from, yes, a list of traits, but also to identify moments when they've exhibited those traits, and to gather together symbols or mementos of those moments and create a resilience reminder on a bookshelf or on their desk or on the kitchen counter, where they can regularly resource themselves with the memories when they've already been resilient. And I will ask them to look at their mementos and revisit those moments of already being resilient every day for 30 days. And there's no magic number in neuroscience of repeating something every day for 30 days, but it's the repetition that rewires the brain. And doing something once a day for 30 days is an easy way to remember to do it. And over time, clients will rewire their sense of self as being resilient. So as we move toward our first break for discussion and Q&A, I would ask you to take a moment to reflect on the question: how do you work with your clients to help them discover their strengths, identify when they've already been resilient, claim their capacities to be resilient, to counter the negativity bias we all have as human beings innate in our brains, thanks to evolution, and to dismiss that capacity to dismiss or devalue our strengths, but also not to do a Pollyanna bypass, to help clients come to some realistic assessment and realistic optimism about their resilience and their choice of response to the issues. So we have about 10 minutes, I hope, for discussion and Q&As, and any comments or insights from your own experience. So please. So in the second section, we'll explore the unique impacts of the coronavirus pandemic on resilience, our clients and our own. What does resilience look like under these conditions? And do the practices for strengthening resilience change in any significant way? We'll look at the somatic front line of resilience and the importance of returning the nervous system to equilibrium, deepening connections with other people to do that, and cultivating a resilience mindset to strengthen resilience for the long haul. So the coronavirus pandemic and the resultant sheltering in place caused major paradigm shifts in mid-March for everyone. All the rules and all the anchors changed overnight. Just the week before, I was in person at Book Passage at a friend's book launch. I was in person with friends at the Lark Theater. And suddenly, overnight, the dissolving of everything we'd planned, new orders, new rules, shut down to cope with new dangerous dangers. In practicing resilience and from the emerging understanding of polyvagal theory, I've learned the importance of regulating the nervous system as the front line of resilience. And in fact, returning to a baseline physiological equilibrium is considered an objective measure of resilience. I've learned to pay attention to the nervous system, mine, my friends and family, clients and colleagues. We all know the first perceptions of danger and life threat come from the autonomic nervous system much faster than conscious processing. Outside of our awareness, the autonomic nervous system is always scanning our inner physiology and the outer environment, especially our people environment, for signs of safety, danger, and life threat. The dangers may vary quite a bit by race or class or gender, but the nervous system itself is biological and universal. At the first perception of danger, real or in memory or imaginary, the nervous system revs up. It's a sympathetic activation, the mobilization that leads to fight or flight, moving toward the danger or moving away from toxicity. We act and react quickly to solve the problem or the danger we are facing. And if that activation doesn't work, or sometimes out of our condition, we don't even try that, the nervous system will deactivate, immobilize, go into parasympathetic paralysis, the dorsal dive in the new polyvagal terminology. We shut down, withdraw, collapse, become immobilized. We can think of the too much revving up as anxiety, too much shutting down as depression, and it would be very common or even natural for clients and us to experience either or both many times a day as part of an overwhelmed nervous system's response to the pandemic. The important thing is to be able to return the nervous system to its natural physiological baseline equilibrium, its homeostasis, its range of resilience. And trauma therapists know that range as the window of tolerance. The sudden overactivation of the nervous system could cause a sudden scramble. And we probably all did some of that this spring, quickly transitioning clients to telehealth. For me, watching all of the in-person teaching schedule for 2020 all over the world dissolve, shifting to teaching online webinars in a matter of weeks. I have my own tendencies toward catastrophic thinking, fueled by this sympathetic, don't just sit there, do something. I grew up with parents who had lived through the Great Depression and World War II. So I caught myself thinking, the grocery stores are going to run out of food. The banks are going to fail. The internet is going to fail. Social Security will fail. And I did all of that in 3 seconds. And I had to reel that back in. All of that scrambling is trying to solve the problem. And I needed to return to my window of tolerance, brain's base of skillful coping. But I was vulnerable to the other side too, collapsing into the dorsal dive. At the beginning of the pandemic, in a shock, in a daze, not knowing what to do, I needed to reactivate and stay engaged. And this is where the stability and structure of routines was actually helpful to people in the early stages of the pandemic. Eat breakfast, do the dishes, feed the cat, walk the dog, check email, keep moving, stay engaged. So I pushed myself and I pushed my clients to find and come back into that window of tolerance. And because we are regulating the body's signals of safety and danger, we use body-based tools: breath, touch, sound, movement, visualization. You know many of these tools already, and it's in our general culture now. When we experience stress or fear, breathe, because it is slow, deep, gentle breathing that regulates the entire nervous system and brings the nervous system back to calm. I once heard Bessel van der Kolk, who's the pioneering researcher of trauma for 40 years, and the author of The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma, say at a conference, if we therapists don't have a body-based trauma therapy in our toolbox, we could be guilty of malpractice. Hand on the heart, or anywhere that feels safe and soothing to the body. Hand on the forehead and on the back of the neck to create a connection between the brain stem and the higher brain center of executive functioning. A tool from Havening, which is a relatively new and powerful somatic-based trauma therapy, gently rubbing the hands together. And that will be in your bibliography. Giving and receiving a hug when it's safe to do that these days, or a virtual hug. I have one client who taught me touchless touch as we meet on Zoom. So I lift up my hand so she can see it on her screen. And then she touches her hand to where I put my hand on the screen, and it's comforting and co-regulating for her. Movement, especially any movement, juxtaposing tension and relaxation, like progressive muscle relaxation, which has been around for 40 years. So you tense a muscle group and you hold it for a count of 7. And then you release and relax those muscles for a count of 15, so that the relaxation is twice as long as the tensing. The counting focuses the mind's attention and keeps the mind from ruminating on the worries of the day. And I found this technique especially helpful when clients are trying to go to sleep at night. Using movement to help clients recover both energy and calm, I teach the power pose that Inequity developed at Harvard Business School. And I can do this in the room with the client or even online in Zoom. So you stand tall and erect and your feet are planted firmly on the ground, your feet hip width apart. You lift up your spine. You lift up your chest. You lift up your head and you stretch your arms over your head like Tadasana, the mountain pose in yoga. You stay grounded in your feet and hips and torso, but you feel the energy move up your spine, through your arms, and through the crown of your head toward the sky. It's getting the energy moving up the spine. That's the most important part of the pose. Then I have clients practice moving back and forth between a posture of anxiety or worry and the posture of the power pose for about 5 minutes back and forth. Gradually letting go of the posture of worry and remaining in the posture of power and strength and courage. Then I ask them to practice the power pose in the moments before they enter any challenging situation, which these days may be going to the grocery store. They find a quiet, private place where they can let themselves feel the anxiety or worry in their body that they want to shift gently, not to overwhelm. And then they move into the power pose. And then they walk mindfully into that situation with more inner strength and energy. And with frequent practice, the power pose becomes a natural way to tap into your inner strength and courage and resilience. So these would be tools we would be using in response to any dysregulation of the nervous system to cope with any stress or trauma. And I really am pushing these tools with clients during this pandemic to begin regulating the nervous system, recovering the range of resilience, being able to think clearly and respond wisely. And for the COVID-19 pandemic specifically, besides the client's individual nervous systems responding to the signals of danger or life threat specific to them individually, everyone is responding to the collective anxiety, the collective sense of threat and trauma so pervasive these days. At any time, anything new, unfamiliar, unknown, unpredictable, will evoke signal anxiety in the nervous system and catalyze us to take steps to learn and understand and make known and figure out what to do. The scale of the unknown and the unpredictability and contradictory information of when this will be over, when will we be safe again? This is safe. This isn't. This was safe yesterday, but not today. That's really pushing the envelope of people's capacity to manage that signal anxiety. It's very similar to the unknowns and the unpredictability of the wildfires that we're currently experiencing that wasn't even part of this topic when we scheduled this webinar. So we're experiencing collective anxiety because no one seems to have a correct answer or an accurate timetable for how long this shutdown will continue. And that can lead to a kind of collective malaise, a collective enduring through passivity. And it's especially hard for parents who are now double sheltering in place with the kids at home, online for school, but not able to meet up with their friends or even run off some energy outside. So one answer to that collective anxiety and collective passivity is to foster, encourage, and require connections with other people. So we all know this too. Human beings are social beings. Human brains are social brains. And we all need the reassurance of safe connection with safe others to co-regulate our own nervous system. We thrive when we experience regular, safe, nourishing, and revitalizing connections with people. And we lean into despair if we experience too much isolation or loneliness. So of course, we try to provide safe connections with our clients ourselves through Zoom or by phone. I do know some therapists who have continued meeting with their clients in person when they have an office large enough and when they have a separate entrance and an exclusive waiting room. Deb Dana, who's a trauma therapist who's very expert in polyvagal theory, has set up her own home office to look almost exactly like her regular office. Same chair, same bookcase, same paintings on the wall, and sitting at a distance from the camera so that it looks like she's sitting with her clients in her real office. There are webinars available to teach therapists how to work most effectively on Zoom. Lisa Ferentz, who's an expert trauma therapist, did a wonderful webinar last April for leading edge seminars in Toronto. It's still available on their website. It's so important to look at the little light of the camera on your computer when you're speaking, so that it looks to your client like you're speaking directly to them. And then to look at the image of the client when they're speaking to pick up the nuances of their facial expressions and body language. And because Lisa had a background in theater before becoming a psychotherapist, she encourages therapists to be bigger on screen than they would need to be if they were still meeting in person face-to-face. More animated, more expressive, more energized and engaged to overcome the flatness of the screen. And I find there's real joy in seeing my client in person, even when it's on the screen, showing up and savoring the continued connection. I do push my clients to stay connected with other people as another level of protection and nurturing during the pandemic. And that will bring up all of the issues clients already have around connection and disconnection, good communication and boundaries, or poor communication and boundaries, issues of trust and shame around relating to others. So there may be an opportunity to do some good therapeutic work around clients' practices to stay in connection with others during shutdown. I encourage clients to be as creative as they can be. Chess games and board games via the internet with cousins and friends, Zoom dinners, Zoom cocktail parties, group bike trips on the weekend, in-person block parties and book clubs with enough physical distancing, creating study pods now that schools are in session online. I gave a eulogy at a Zoom memorial service this summer, which was more intimate and transcendent to be in a community of family and friends than I could have imagined. And this emphasis on connection could lead to an awareness of interconnection. The word pandemic comes from the Greek words for all people. And there's not a place on the planet that isn't touched by this virus. And the need to refocus not just on individual or family health and safety, but on protecting the common good could be one of the silver linings of this terrible plague. So the Belfast, Ireland COVID-19 team sent out a poem early in the pandemic that quickly went viral, so you may have seen it, called Love in Action. When you go out and see the empty streets, empty stadiums, and empty train platforms, don't say to yourself, it looks like the end of the world. What you're seeing is love in action. What you're seeing in that negative space is how much we do care for each other, for our grandparents and our parents, our brothers and sisters, for people we will never meet. People will lose jobs over this. Some people will lose their business, and some will lose their lives. All the more reason to take a moment when you're out on your walk or on your way to the store or just watching the news to look into the emptiness and marvel at all of that love. Let it fill you and sustain you. It isn't the end of the world. It's the most remarkable act of global solidarity we may ever witness. So besides the somatic tools and this encouragement or requirement of connections that we provide clients to cope with the now double sheltering from the pandemic and the fires, we can vigorously encourage them to use the practices that help them sustain a sense of meaning and joy and even awe at any time. Spending time in nature when that's feasible. Enjoying culture through YouTube videos. Many are available now. Among my favorites at the moment are the free Now More Than Ever playlist from Cal Performances at UC Berkeley and the free Conversations with Authors sponsored by Book Passage. Spiritual practices like prayer, meditation, and yoga. There are many classes online these days, even fitness classes, that incorporate a sense of community. And one more next step in coping with the pandemic that I lead all of my clients into, which is cultivating a resilience mindset. It's basically the growth mindset of Carol Dweck's research on mindsets when she was at Columbia University. So very briefly. A fixed mindset comes from a system of beliefs that talents, aptitudes, temperaments, personality traits, and preferences are fixed. Either you have the smarts or the good looks or the talents or the traits of resilience, or you don't. And that is so relevant right now as we try to break through our own fixed mindsets about the trait of any client or any group. Dweck doesn't refer to shame in her research, but folks who have been conditioned into a fixed mindset feel an urgency to prove over and over again that they are as good as they believe they are, or more likely that others believe they are, to meet expectations, to succeed, to never fail. So hence, with a fixed mindset, are super sensitive to being judged and are very vulnerable to feeling rejected, a failure, an idiot, a loser, worthless, nobody loves me, pitiful. And the response to failure or a setback is to fear challenge, to devalue effort, and to avoid risk, to stop trying, to give up, to retreat, withdraw, and veg out. So the fixed mindset robs people of their capacities to cope. A growth mindset comes from a system of beliefs that talents, aptitudes, temperaments, personality traits, and preferences are simply a starting point for development. That would be a healthy mindset to view our clients or anyone in our society from, to view ourselves as we learn more about our own condition, reactions, and behaviors. Oops, messed up. What can I learn? That growth mindset fosters curiosity, resilience, and a passion for learning through effort and perseverance. People with growth mindsets respond especially well when things are not going well. They tend to stretch themselves, confront obstacles, embrace risk, and stick through the hard times. And rather than be embarrassed or blocked by a sense of deficiency, they can acknowledge what skill or capacity is missing and set to work cultivating it. They take direct, wise, and compassionate action. Love of challenge, belief in effort, resilience in the face of setbacks, greatest creativity and success are the hallmarks of the growth mindset. And in Dweck's view, we can intentionally choose to cultivate a growth mindset. That would be characteristic of the growth mindset right there. Our mindsets are not fixed. We can put in the effort to shift our orientation to life events from fixed to growth. We can shift how we filter our perceptions of ourselves and our experiences, how we filter our perceptions of other people and their experiences, and their capacities to change and grow. That means we live our lives not about avoiding failure or distress, but about grabbing a hold of failure or distress as an opportunity to learn, to improve, and to master. As Pat and I were processing our mistake about scheduling this webinar on Rosh Hashanah, we could say, let's just start with, we're all in trouble. We all make mistakes. We all mess up. We all do. What we can try to do is become aware, recognize the mistake, acknowledge the harm, learn from what we did, and practice what we could do differently next time. Make amends and repair and recover our resilience. So choosing to cultivate a growth mindset and master our resilience changes everything. So I will lead my clients and I will lead you in a practice of shifting from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, but the exercise is in my book and it's on my website as a free guided practice. Take a moment to reflect on many different situations where you faced a challenge or even something simply new or unknown. Reflect on your own thought process and your own behaviors. Discern times when you did hang back, hesitate, or refuse to attempt something you perceived a bit beyond your capacities. Discern times also when you approached a challenge as a learning opportunity with interest, curiosity, and some confidence, at least a willingness to give it a go. Most of us have experienced elements of both fixed and growth mindsets. For one of your times from a growth mindset, reflect on what made your decision to try and your perseverance in trying even possible. How did you choose to be resilient? Identify both internal and external resources. For one of your times being caught in a fixed mindset, imagine how you could have behaved differently, finding your courage and encouragement from others to go ahead and try. Engage, persevere, try again and again until you experience some success or at least a healthy pride in your effort. Identify a new situation now where you could try coming from a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. Choose a situation where you might reasonably have a chance for success and focus on shifting your mindset from fixed to growth. And reflect on any differences this choice makes on your choice of behavior. What will you do when a setback or adversity happens? And this exercise helps clients move toward a more resilient mindset. And when I'm working with clinicians, I update the research about strengthening resilience. So I want to share this quote from Kelly McGonigal, health psychologist at Stanford University. And Kelly says in her book, The Upside of Stress, Why Stress is Good for You and How to Get Good at It. Resilience is not about being untouched by adversity or unruffled by difficulties. It's about allowing stress to awaken in you these core human strengths of courage, connection, and growth. Whether you are looking at resilience in overworked executives or war-torn communities, people in military deployment, immigrants or refugees, people living in poverty, battling cancer, or raising a child with autism, the same themes emerge. People who are resilient allow themselves to be changed by the experience of adversity. They maintain a basic sense of trust in themselves and a connection to something bigger than themselves. They also find ways to make meaning out of suffering. To be resilient is not to avoid difficulty, but to play an active role in how difficulty transforms you. To play an active role in how difficulty transforms you. That's what we try to lead our clients through. And then another piece of research from the book Resilience, The Science of Mastering Life's Greatest Challenges by Stephen Southwick and Dennis Charney, who are psychiatrists at Yale University. People who are resilient tend to be flexible. Flexible in the way they think about challenges and flexible in the way they react emotionally to stress. They are not wedded to a specific style of coping. Instead, they shift from one coping strategy to another, depending on the circumstances. Many are able to accept what they cannot change, to learn from failure, to use emotions like grief and anger to fuel compassion and courage, and to search for opportunity and meaning in adversity. So even in this pandemic, inviting clients to play an active role in how these difficulties transform them, framing the challenges of these times as learning from the AFGOs, another frickin' growth opportunity. What am I learning? About resilience and about making choices. Bernard Baruch says the art of living lies less in eliminating our troubles than in growing with them. Asking, what's happened? What is happening? What are the consequences? What did I do? Or what am I doing? What could I have done differently? What will I do differently next time? These are essential questions in bouncing forward to new possibilities, someday to a new normal. So now is the time for another break for discussion, questions of anything I've talked about here, and learning from you, how you help your clients learn the practices that will regulate their nervous system and return to their range of resilience, foster the connections with safe others that will nourish their spirits, and help them learn from the AFGOs of this pandemic, large or small. So the next section then is corralling of racial injustice and social inequity that might spill over into any oppression from othering and marginalizing and dehumanizing the intersection of race and class and gender with sexual orientation and religious faith, or being homeless, or being mentally ill, or being disabled. And I will say from the beginning that this section might be a little bit longer, and the last section I know is shorter, so we will have time to cover everything, I hope. The book Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Isabel Wilkerson was published in June 2020. It's in your bibliography. It's brilliantly written. It gives a comprehensive and excellent overview of the intertwining of race and class and gender and religion in America from 1619, before America was America, to 2019. The intertwining of these discriminations to create what has functioned for 400 years as a caste system in America. So Wilkerson connects the dots and deconstructs the paradigms that create and reinforce and protect the caste system. She posits that the caste system is the foundational belief system that holds all of these intersectionalities together: race, class, gender, and religion, that creates the laws and customs and mindsets that implements and reinforces and protects that caste system. So she suggests that caste is what gives any and all of these isms their power. So I'm actually not going to review all of that long intertwined history here. There are many resources in the bibliography that are good places to start for that. I want to corral the issues of any privilege oppression dynamics into a clinical focus. What we as clinicians might be listening for and intervening about when it comes to the impact of these isms on us and on our clients. In 20 minutes, exploring the role of othering that leads to dehumanizing, that leads to oppression, and what we as clinicians can do about that. And the role of shame, blame in that process. What we as clinicians not only can do about that, but we're really good at doing something about that. So that our reawakening right now to racism or anti-racism, to social and economic inequity or social and economic parity, our responses to the Black Lives Matter or Me Too or Occupy movements don't collapse into what Michael Kerman of Leading Edge Seminars calls the flavor of the month. How we can become aware and stay awake and learn from what's causing so much fracturing and unrest in our society right now. Acknowledge our part in maintaining or denying or challenging or resolving those underlying causes, and proactively choose to act on behalf of healing and change and learning and growth. To play an active role in how these adversities transform us and transform our clients. So believe me, Focusing on shame and blame in a clinical setting is not a bypass or a denial of the larger context. Shame, blame really are elements of a fixed mindset. The pride, shame poles of a narcissistic or shame-based mindset. The belief systems and the resulting behaviors have been researched in our field for a long time as the powerful underlying contributors to the policies and practices of the isms that we're exploring today. All blacks are this, or all whites are that. Not seeing individuals or accepting differences among individuals and the possibilities for learning and growth among individuals. Shame, blame is one of the most powerful weapons of racist, classist, sexist policies and the institutions that keep people in their place. And I've studied and written and taught quite a bit about shame for as long as I've been teaching about resilience, because shame, blame is also the most powerful psychological derailer of our resilience. So I'm going to begin with a model for working with shame, blame from Paul Gilbert, the developer of compassion-focused therapy in the UK. And Paul says, given your evolutionary neurobiology, which you share with all human beings, your inherited genetics and temperament, your family of origin attachment conditioning, and the expectations, opportunities, and the restrictions of your culture, the racial, class, gender, religion context we are all paying more attention to now, the time and place in history that you've been born into. Given all of that, who you are and how you navigate the world is not your fault. Who you are and how you navigate the world is not your fault. And that can be such a relief to clients. And then Paul goes on to say, given the plasticity innate in your brain, who you become and how you behave in your world is your responsibility, not your fault. It is your responsibility. And we'll come back to that responsibility. So to unpack this, given your evolutionary neurobiology, one of the most deeply embedded patterns in our brains is us versus them. Identifying with your own group, identifying anyone not in your group, othering anyone not in your group. So that was useful for survival when we lived in bands of 50 to 150 people on the savannah in Africa, and evolution is all about survival. PBS is now broadcasting a 4-part series called Hacking Your Mind. It began September 9th. It's easy to stream it, and it's in your bibliography. The first episode features research with a group of 5-year-olds who were shown images of children happy or frowning, friendly or mean. And in the images, the children were wearing orange t-shirts or green t-shirts. And based on the images, all of the young research subjects wanted to be in the green t-shirt group, to be with the happy, friendly children. So they were given green t-shirts to wear. And then in a series of exercises like giving gifts to other children, depending on the color of their t-shirt, they always favored the children in green t-shirts. So the research found that the children identified with their new group within 15 to 30 seconds. No instruction needed, only images and behaviors. And very coincidentally, a few weeks before, while I was preparing this webinar, a former client of mine, also a former therapist here in Marin, sent me the link to the very famous documentary, A Class Divided, about a 3rd grade teacher in Iowa, Jane Elliott, who responded to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968 by beginning her class the next day. It might be fun to judge people today by the color of their eyes. Would you like to try this? Since I'm the teacher and I have blue eyes, I think maybe the blue-eyed people should be on top the first day. I mean, the blue-eyed people are the better people in the room. And the film then records the students' reactions to being considered to their superior to their classmates or inferior, or the next day switching roles and being told that they were now inferior or superior. And I showed this film to my students when I was a social sciences teacher 40 years ago at Berkeley High. And even watching the film, the students had powerful visceral reactions to being told and rewarded or punished for being good or bad, based solely on eye color. The students in the original 3rd grade class felt the impact for the rest of their lives. You can see the rerunning of the documentary on Frontline on PBS. So this deeply embedded pattern in the brain of identifying with a group and identifying with all the negative or positive messages about the group based only on physical characteristics underlies what researchers and clinicians are now calling implicit bias. And it's quicker than thinking. We're hardwired by evolution to instantly discern differences between ourselves and another based only on physical characteristics, and then adding the learned conditioning from our culture, our society, of better than or less than, good enough or not good at all, safe or dangerous. And this is not to justify in any way the cementing of that biological tendency into a kind of caste system where the rules and the social mores and the structures and the institutions deny people life and livelihood, freedom and opportunity based on social constructs. And it's not to excuse ourselves from becoming aware of and overcoming the conditioning of that implicit bias, but simply to acknowledge how deeply hardwired these responses are. And we can't just think our way through them or easily train ourselves out of them. There's a wonderful example of how deeply embedded any of our biases can be from psychologist Thelma Bryant Davis in a presentation that she did for Nicobum. She had invited another Black psychologist to present at her class on multiculturalism. And when that guest presenter arrived in the classroom, she shared how, being disabled and in a wheelchair, she had come across the entire campus and no one looked at her, made eye contact with her, spoken with her. She was experiencing people's shaming, not because she was Black, but because she was disabled. And Dr. Bryant Davis had to acknowledge, I never even thought of that. So this layer of conditioning on top of the brain's innate capacities for innate bias, the centuries of messages we have heard and learned and encoded in our implicit memories about ourselves and about others. This othering and dehumanizing in a caste system leads to the shaming and blaming used to reinforce the boundaries in a caste system. There's the new vocabulary we're learning now of racial pride and white privilege and microaggressions coming from the waking up to the impact of our society's long history of othering and bigotry and shame. So I experienced that heartache myself as I was writing the book Resilience. I was walking in my own neighborhood, turned a corner, and I noticed someone dark-skinned walking toward me. And I found myself wondering, are there more Mexicans moving into the neighborhood? And instantly I thought, Linda, that's a racist thought. And in the next instant, I recognized the person as the computer guru that I rely on every other week to resolve all the wobbles and glitches and heartaches of my digital technology. That entire sequence of thoughts took less than 10 seconds. And the heartache and the shame lasted much longer. And the rewiring of my brain will take longer still. Fortunately, there's another recognition pattern embedded in our brains, just as important and just as powerful as implicit bias toward groups. And that is a preference to focus on and respond to individuals more than groups. And you know this from the myriads of fundraising campaigns to feed hungry children or educate children in underdeveloped countries. Rather than the facts or the statistics, and rather than focusing on the needs of a large group as a whole, providers of those services focus on one individual, one child who survived the earthquake in Haiti, one adult who needs cataract surgery in Nepal. We know the power of focusing on the individual. We know the power of the image of a 3-year-old Syrian boy, Alan Kurdi, washed up face down on a beach in Turkey. His family trying to cross the Aegean Sea to get to a refugee camp in Greece. That image went viral 5 years ago. And the awareness of and interest in the plight of 26 million refugees around the world hit a new high. When the video of George Floyd's murder went viral, the focus on one individual symbolizing so many Black men and Black boys and Black girls killed by police sparked protests by millions of people around the world, making demands for change that continue today. So this bias toward the individual can be used to undo the implicit bias about a group. So in Deep Diversity, Overcoming Us versus Them, the racial diversity expert Shakil Choudhury tells of his own experience of flunking the implicit assessment test, a psychological tool that's often used to detect unconscious biases. Then living in Toronto, Choudhury, who's of Pakistani descent, was chagrined to discover that the test indicated he had an unconscious preference for white people over Black people. He developed his own practice to rectify or recondition that bias. And what he did was he identified negative thoughts or assumptions that would go through his mind when he encountered or imagined encountering a Black person, especially perceptions of danger. And he then identified several positive thoughts to use as the antidotes to the negative ones, especially thoughts or assumptions associated with safety, qualities such as being kind or generous or hardworking and practical. And as he encountered or imagined encountering a Black person, he repeated the positive thoughts. He kept repeating them until he noticed a shift in his current perception of that person. He was noticing that the original negative perceptions came up less frequently and began to fade in the background. He continued repeating this practice until these positive thoughts automatically came to his mind when he encountered a Black person. So when Choudhury took the implicit assessment test again several years later, he discovered that the results showed he had broken the prejudice habit. His conscious practice of reconditioning had rewired his unconscious conditioned bias. So clients can work with any group of people they identify as other toward whom they know they have a negative bias. Men or women or elders or children or members of any minority group or people of a particular sexual orientation, even football players and CEOs. Clinicians have excellent skills in helping clients notice, reflect on, and choose to rewire patterns, messages, beliefs buried in implicit memory. It's what we do all the time. And in a moment, I'll suggest specific ways to do that with shame and blame. So on with unpacking Paul Gilbert's model, given our genetics and temperament. It's true that clients can inherit traits of shyness or affability, and what they learn to do with those traits is their responsibility. And clinicians can help them work through any shame blame caused by responses to that inheritance. We do tend to recognize gender as determined by genes, X and Y chromosomes, though there is increasing flexibility and fluidity in how people choose to navigate that. Again, therapists can be very skillful in helping clients recognize and work through any shame about their gender or society's messages about their gender. We now know from the completion of the scientific mapping of the human genome in 2003 that all human beings share 99.9% of the genetic code. So despite the centuries of negative messages about race from religious leaders and the pseudoscience of eugenics, scientists now know there is no gene for race. There are genes for skin color and eye color and hair color, but there is no gene for race. Race is entirely a social construct. And the social construct around race have been brutal, nowhere more so than here in America. And the construct of race by white people has oppressed and shamed people into slavery and oppression and generated deep, deep bias in everyone, including people of color, as anti-racist scholars are the first to admit. And is it incumbent upon us as clinicians to help clients recognize and work through and heal any elements, any shame, blame about race, either their own race or the race of others? Yes, it is. More in a moment. Continuing the model, we know family of origin and attachment conditioning are very powerful factors in causing shame, blame in anyone, about anything. Temperament, personality, social constructs. We know the learning and encoding of the 3 R's of attachment, regulating the nervous system and emotions, relating to self and others, responding to life events with flexibility and stability rather than rigidity or chaos, is at the core of what can foster resilience or derail it into shame. And the heart of our therapeutic interventions is to heal that shame and to recover an inner secure base of resilience. A client of mine recently came up with an acronym BASH, B-A-S-H, for blame, anger, shame, and helplessness, to help her remember that those feelings or behaviors she was bashing herself about were patterns that she had learned in her family of origin from many dynamics in the relationship where she felt ostracized, being overweight, lesbian, more interested in science than getting married. So the acceptance and self-acceptance of the reparenting we do as therapists to heal any shame blame that arises from any attachment conditioning or attachment trauma or social conditioning or construct. It's at the heart of our calling as psychotherapists. You can think of shaming and blaming in terms of cultural competence, which we clinicians have held as a priority for a very long time, to know and care about how the racial, class, gender, and sexual orientation conditioning of our clients and the realities of the larger cultural messages might affect their sense of self and functioning and well-being. How our own consciousness and sensitivities might affect their sense of self and functioning and well-being. That if we are white therapists, we might not even consider race much in our dealings with the world, but our clients of color have to take it into consideration all the time. The microaggressions we're becoming sensitive to are the comments and behaviors that express a shaming, blaming stance toward a client because of their identity with a particular racial group or class or gender, whether we are consciously aware of or consciously intending that disrespect or harm or not. And shame is something we clinicians can do something about. Until recently, much of the clinical emphasis on working with shame was shaped by the culture's perspective of antidoting the feelings of unworthiness, feeling less than, through cultivating a sense of pride, self-esteem, through self-improvement, achievement, and accomplishment, to feel better about ourselves by becoming a better person. And that's been as true for the white majority as it has been for people of color. Improve yourself to our standard and you will be accepted. And we still do want to help our clients who become who they want to become, to fulfill their potential in an authentic, genuine way. But shame can't really be healed by cultivating self-esteem through accomplishment and achievement. Shame is the very powerful and seemingly intractable feeling or belief that we are flawed or defective, unlovable and unworthy, a failure, a loser. And that's who we are. That who we are is bad. And shame is really healed only through self-acceptance. I'm a human being. All human beings are vulnerable to feeling bad when they feel bad or mess up. When I saw the email from Pat asking me to call her, I didn't even know what it was about yet. It turned out about scheduling our webinar on the Jewish holiday. But without even knowing that, when I saw the email, my first reaction was, what have I done wrong? That shame reaction is so instant and it runs so deep. So that's the power of the new protocols for working with shame blame, like the Mindful Self-Compassion Protocol developed by psychologist Kristen Neff at University of Texas, Austin, and Chris Germer at Harvard. Mindful awareness of exactly what I'm experiencing in this moment. Self-compassion for myself as the experiencer of the experience. And finding refuge and resource in common humanity. All human beings are vulnerable to feeling this way. And the RAIN practice developed by psychologist and meditation teacher Tara Brach in her book, Radical Compassion. Recognizing that what I'm experiencing, the R is to recognize what I'm experiencing, what I'm feeling, especially if it's shame or fear or anger. A is for allow the feelings to be there, accept them as a normal part of being a human being. I is to inquire into the felt sense of the feeling and the needs of the part of myself that is feeling that feeling. And then N is for nurture, to give that part the understanding and care and acceptance and validation that it needs to return to the window of tolerance, basically. So healing shame into self-acceptance, self-appreciation, and even self-celebration is always at the heart of the work we do as therapists. We accept the client exactly as they are. My consultant early on when I first got licensed, Paul Bowman, taught me that his stance is, there is nothing you could do or say that would ever cause me to turn away from you. So we might say that about a client's behavior, but saying there's nothing wrong about who you are that would cause me to turn away from you would be addressing the shame mindset. Through our acceptance of the client can accept themselves. And when they accept themselves exactly as they are, they can more easily accept others exactly as they are. And in terms of the expectations and opportunities and restrictions of the social and cultural context you were born into, the lens of shame allows us to perceive and respond to the impact of all of these isms in ways that are the bottom line root of healing and transformation. We're all learning. It's very different. Being born into a white male body versus a white female body, or a black male body versus a black female body. Being born poor or being born into privilege. Being born in the US or in Afghanistan or in the Sudan. Being born in this century or the last century or previous centuries. Racist and sexist and classist discriminatory policies are intended to engender a sense of shame in the people marginalized, mistreated, disrespected, and of course, much, much worse than that, being brutalized and killed and living in daily fear of being brutalized and killed. And those feelings of shame, not good enough, never good enough, no way to ever be good enough, no way to ever be accepted as not bad, are what has been internalized by people of color, except when they themselves know better, and by women, except when they themselves know better, and by people who are poor or unemployed, except when they themselves know better, or people who are gay or lesbian or disabled, or who follow a different religion, or who are overweight or divorced. Any othering from the norms of society that can be used to keep people feeling less than. Even people now struggling with the privilege of whiteness and the fears of the shame of being racist or being called a racist. So I found Dr. Ibram X. Kendi's definition in his #1 New York Times bestseller, How to Be an Anti-Racist, so helpful. It's in your bibliography. Racist is creating or supporting or being in denial about racist policies that create and sustain racial inequities, racial groups not on an equal footing in terms of the resources of housing and employment and education and healthcare, conditions reinforced by racist ideas. An anti-racist is challenging and changing racist policies that create and sustain racial inequities, and recognizing and challenging the racist ideas that support them. So Kendi points out that anybody can be a racist because racist is a descriptor of behavior. It's not who the person is. White people can be racist and people of color can be racist. And that everybody can be both racist and anti-racist as their behavior changes with circumstances. Kind of like someone being angry in one moment and not angry in the next moment. Being angry is an expression of an emotion. It's not who you are. Anybody's vulnerable to being angry, and everybody's responsible for choosing how they manage to express that anger. Anybody has the possibility of behaving in a racist way or in an anti-racist way. Being racist or anti-racist is not who you are. It's how you choose to behave. And that can change moment to moment. There is always a choice. There is always the opportunity to see and make a different choice. How you respond to the issue is the issue. And given the power of the neuroplasticity innate in your brain, who you are and how you navigate the world is your responsibility. So clinicians know the essential work of helping clients become aware of their patterns of thinking, managing their feelings, making decisions, and bringing those patterns to conscious awareness so that clients can choose to shift or rewire those patterns, can choose the experiences that will help bring and shift and rewire those patterns. That dawning awareness requires us to work with the shame of having these patterns. As clinicians, we're listening all the time for the voices of deficiency or unworthiness, less than, and the defenses against those feelings. We can be very busy helping clients discover, uncover, recover, and believe in their own innate goodness, strength, and courage, healing the shame into accepting and honoring who they are just as they are, with all of the inherent potential of becoming who they want to be. Basically, all of the modalities we have been trained in have this focus on healing shame at their core. AEDP, IFS, DBT, all of the trauma therapies, EMDR, SE, sensory motor, all of the mindfulness-based therapies, all of the family and child and group therapies. The most helpful guidance for clinicians I've found in this moment and in these movements of healing from the trauma of racism, etc., is from a fellow clinician, Resmaa Menakem, and his New York Times bestselling book, My Grandmother's Hands, Racialization and the Healing of Trauma. It's in your bibliography. You may already know it. Your clients may have already told you about it. Menakem is a trauma therapist in Minneapolis. He's trained in somatic experiencing with Peter Levine and trauma therapy with Bessel van der Kolk. And Menakem's approach starts with what we already know: polyvagal theory of the nervous system, the somatic body-based tools needed to heal trauma, the multi-generational transmission of trauma, and then bridges body-based trauma therapy to the racialization of trauma held in the body. White bodies, black bodies, in all bodies. And in fact, I first learned about My Grandmother's Hands from a client, a white client who had done years of very good work on healing from trauma of severe childhood sexual abuse. And she loved Menakem's book and his body-based exercises, especially the sensory motor pushing. And just last week, she told me that she and her husband had watched a PBS special about the jazz pianist Count Basie. And at one point, a reporter had asked him what he did about the shame of having to enter through the back door of the venues where he was playing. And he said, "That shame is on the white folks. That shame isn't mine. I'm good." And that night, my client had an epiphany, and she was so excited, she said she jumped out of the shower to tell her husband, "This shame is not mine. It's theirs. It's theirs, not mine. I'm good." So Menakem shares the view, as many, many thought leaders and teachers do in this phase of rethinking racism and any other othering that is shaming, that racism is bad. But you, the target of that racism, even the perpetrator of that racism, are not bad. And that's a radical idea. Radical for the people of color who have been consistently and systematically taught that they are bad from birth. Radical for the holders of white privilege, who may be ignorant or in denial of that white privilege. The privilege of being born into a culture where whiteness is considered normal, the standard, what's even considered superior. But they're not bad for being born white. It's a radical idea. And we work with all the shame around it. Another good resource is Janina Fisher. She's a well-known trauma therapist here in the Bay Area. And she has just collaborated with Black and Brown colleagues on a new webinar series for therapists, a therapist path for exploring implicit bias and racial trauma. It's also in your bibliography. So all of this is not to say that the impacts of the learned conditioning based on racial and social constructs is okay. As Dr. Kendi says, the damaging effect of these isms and the intersectionality of these isms, racism, classism, sexism, have been persistent, pervasive, and predominant in our collective history. So Dr. Gilbert says, given the innate neuroplasticity in your brain, the innate capacities in your brain to learn and change and grow, who you are and how you behave in this world is your responsibility. How you relate to yourself from a shame base, or how you have learned to shame and blame others, even unconsciously, unintentionally, is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to learn and train yourself to change that. So we as clinicians can help our clients shift their perceptions of themselves and others and cultivate a mindset of self-awareness and self-compassion and self-acceptance and compassion and acceptance of others that is the antidote to healing the shame mindset. Just a little bit more. We all have tools in our toolkit to do that, and I start with a simple ABC that's easy for clients to remember, and it's easily applicable to helping clients work with shame. So A is becoming aware of what we're experiencing and our reactions to what we're experiencing, attuning to the felt sense of our experience and our reactions to our experience, allowing what's happening and allowing our reactions to what's happening to be there, accepting that this is what's happening, accepting that I'm experiencing these painful feelings of shame, even accepting reactions to my reactions to my reactions. B is for being with or befriending, being with the painful contracting and felt sense of shame, or with the defenses against the feeling of shame before we try to push those feelings away and not feel them. Being with and befriending, recognizing that any experience of shame is a signal to pay attention. Something important is happening here, to be with it so that we can work with it. And C is for compassion, as taught in the Mindful Self-Compassion Protocol. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I accept this moment exactly as it is. May I accept myself exactly as I am in this moment. May I give myself all of the allowing and accepting I need in this moment. So Dick Schwartz, who's the developer of internal family systems, reminded us in an article in this month's Psychotherapy Networker titled Working with Our Internalized Racism, that we need to bring this kind of ABC, awareness, being with, and compassion to inner parts as well. Parts that may be racist or ashamed of being racist. Our acceptance and compassion for our clients models their acceptance and compassion for themselves. And the direct, measurable cause and effect outcome of the client experiencing themselves in this positive, accepting, compassionate way is resilience. I love teaching that. The direct, measurable cause and effect outcome is resilience. And that would be for any issue that might be triggering shame for them. And that would be for a client who is the victim of domestic violence or abuse, or a client perpetuating that domestic violence or abuse. Someone who is addicted to alcohol or opioids, or someone who is a workaholic, or addicted to their digital devices and neglectful of family and relationships. Someone who had been othered and discriminated against because of the color of their skin, or the shape of their nose, or the shape of their body, or the ability or disability of their body, their sexual orientation, or condition of employment or unemployment. And that would go for white clients who maybe are just waking up to what it means to have white privilege, or be in complete denial or complete defensiveness about their white privilege. I wonder, I could be wrong, but please help me understand what this means to you. As Audre Lorde wrote in 1980, we have all been programmed to respond to the human differences between us with fear and loathing, and to handle that difference in one of three ways. Ignore it, and if that's not possible, copy it if we think it's dominant, or destroy it if we think it's subordinate. But we have no patterns for relating across our human differences as equals. It's not our differences that divide us, it's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. So clinicians and clients who are white do have a responsibility to wake up to the accident of being born white in this society that does bring privilege with that whiteness, even if you are a woman or a gay or poor or disabled or any of the other intersectionalities that could evoke shame. So intersectionality is an important emerging concept in skillfully and sensitively confronting racial injustice and social inequity. The potential shame and trauma are different for white men and white women, different for Black men and Black women, different for white men and Black men, different for white women and Black women, different for wealthy white men and poor white men, different for privileged Black elites and underprivileged or incarcerated Black men. let alone straight any category, or LGBTQ any category. And there could be a comorbidity of trauma. In How to Be an Anti-Racist, Dr. Kendi shares his own waking up to his own internalized racism, and then sharing his misogyny, and then his homophobia, peeling back layer after layer. We don't have to show up and do all of our diversity, equity, inclusivity work perfectly or even comprehensively. We just need to be willing to wake up and show up and grow up and help our clients do the same as best as they can. As James Baldwin noted, not everything that can be faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And I'll close this section of this huge topic with a quote from a friend who was an electrical engineer at SRI International. The plaque on the entrance to the electrical engineering lab read, "We have not solved your problem. And in fact, we have more questions than when we started. But we believe we are confused at a higher level and about more important things." So now, Adam, any questions or comments? And I have just a few brief minutes for the final section. So in the last section, we're stretching our resilience beyond we may be stretching our resilience what's beyond what a personal self can do in a 2-hour webinar, but how do we stretch our resilience beyond the personal self to the resilience of the very fabric of society itself? What does resilience look like then? Stretching our resilience beyond the personal self, developing a resilience mindset, healing the shame, blame that derails our resilience and causes incalculable harm to our society. These new ways of framing inequity and injustice can lead well beyond racial issues, class issues, issues of gender identity, to the marginalization of homeless people or people with mental illness, people with disability. The waking up can alert us to the intersectionality of all these issues in climate change. So appreciate the person bringing that up. In our role as clinicians, we don't bring our own political or social change preferences into therapy. We don't tell clients what to think. We help them learn how to think. We don't tell clients what to feel. We help them manage their feelings. We don't tell clients what to do. We help them strengthen their capacities to plan and make decisions. We don't impose our own moral compass on our clients. We encourage them to develop their own, to align their aspirations and their actions with a values base that will guide them and strengthen their resilience. And we don't tell them what decisions to make, but we help them take more and more responsibility to make those decisions. So I will often share 2 quotes when I'm teaching about resilience to clients and to clinicians. One is a pairing of quotes from my friend Janet Friedman: "Catch the moment, make a choice." And from the environmental activist Julia Butterfly Hill: "Every moment has a choice, every choice has an impact." That's the trajectory of resilience for ourselves and for our larger society. Catch the moment, make a choice. Every moment has a choice, and every choice has an impact. And then from Clarissa Pinkola Estes: "Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world all at once, but of stretching to mend the part that is within our reach." So helping clients stretch to mend the part within their reach may be their family and their extended family. How do you have the talk about race with your beloved Uncle Bob, right? Their workplace, their children's schools, their local governments. And now with elections coming up, our state and national governments. And that will involve communication and connection in community for the common good. So Tara Brach says in her anti-racism Dharma talks, just start talking to people. Just start talking and learning. You'll make mistakes, you'll mess up. Just start talking and healing. Opening conversations with people is doable. And when there's compassionate care, that can be naturally evoked. The rehumanizing is learnable. And I've learned a lot from John Powell, who's a law professor and African American Studies professor and director of the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley, and his emphasis on communication and connection and community. He says, yes, we must hold each other accountable, but we must hold each other. And he says we have to call people out on their stuff, but we also have to call them in. He says resilience is a team sport. And certainly to turn around the long history and the devastating impact of racial injustice and social inequity in this country, we will certainly have to develop ways to work with each other, many, many others to do it. So I'll close with this quote from Howard Zinn in The People's History of the United States, which is his chronicling of economic inequity in the US. To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act, in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. So one last period of question and discussion, but I also wanted to let people know that I offer consultation to clinicians who are wanting to strengthen resilience in their clients on these issues or any presenting issues. So you can contact me through my website. And that Adam will be emailing you about setting up affinity groups within Marin Kampft, where clinicians can discuss and explore with each other how to approach diversity and equity and inclusivity with their clients, and within this organization, within our profession, and within the larger world. So a marathon, but and I must say I've appreciated the questions, which are spot on, very timely and relevant, and make me think, really make me think. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.